He was sitting in my grandfather's chair, a space more sacred than any church pew. He'd pushed aside my family's heritage, a worn leather journal, for a stack of papers designed to steal it all. "Sign it, Clara," my husband Leo said, his voice a chilling blend of feigned reason and pure greed. "Or I'll make sure the whole world sees you as the villain of this story." He was forcing me to sign away my legacy, but he had no idea I was about to sign his eviction notice instead. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Clara, and I was standing in the heart of my own home, a place that had always smelled of old oak from the library walls and the damp, fertile earth carried in on my grandfather's boots. It was a scent I had always associated with the deepest sense of peace, of belonging, a fragrant tapestry woven from generations of hard work and love for this land. But that morning, peace was a distant memory, a ghost in the halls of my life, and the familiar, comforting scent of the earth felt like a funeral shroud, heavy and suffocating. I was in my office, which had once been my grandfather's library, the sanctuary where he'd sketched the first maps of our family's vineyard over a century ago. It was a room built on dreams and dirt-stained hands, a place of quiet contemplation and bold creation, and it was being desecrated by a presence far uglier than mere dust or the passage of time. On his massive, scarred oak desk, my grandmother's winemaking journal, a priceless heirloom with a worn leather cover containing generations of handwritten wisdom. Vintage notes and family secrets had been carelessly pushed aside, its delicate spine bent awkwardly against a stack of my own business ledgers. In its place sat a stack of cheap, yellow legal paper, covered in my husband Leo's aggressive, slanted handwriting, a script that seemed to slash at the very air in the room, each stroke a testament to his burgeoning arrogance. Leo himself was sitting in my grandfather's deep leather armchair, a piece of furniture that had held more wisdom and integrity than he could ever comprehend. The chair, worn smooth by the honest labor of my ancestors, seemed to reject him, holding him stiffly in its embrace. He wore an expensive Italian suit my money had purchased for a gallery opening he'd insisted on attending last month, and he had positioned himself as if he were the rightful master of this room, of this legacy. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes, a hollow imitation of a man of substance, the fine wool of the suit unable to conceal the petty man within. He'd even moved my collection of prestigious wine awards, the physical proof of years of sleepless nights and back-breaking work, stacking them clumsily in a corner like discarded toys to make space for his sleek, impersonal tablet. When he looked up at me, his smile was cold, foreign, the predatory expression of a conqueror, not a partner. It was the smile of someone who believed they had already won, and the battle had not yet even begun. The final insult, the one that made my blood run cold and my breath catch in my throat, was the wet ring on my latest project. He had placed his heavy ceramic coffee mug directly on top of the final, hand-drawn design for my new limited edition wine label, a tribute to my grandmother I had poured 6 months of my soul into. The stain was slowly spreading, a perfect circle of casual disrespect, a watermark of his contempt for my work, my passion, my entire world. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes, screaming a truth I had refused to listen to for far too long to him. Everything I held sacred was merely disposable, an obstacle on his path to unearned wealth. "We need to talk about fairness, Clara," he began, his voice carefully rehearsed to sound reasonable, even wounded. He had practiced this speech. I could hear the artificial cadence in his words, the carefully placed pauses designed for dramatic effect. He was performing, and I was his unwilling audience. But underneath the performance, I could hear the greed coiled beneath each syllable, a venomous snake ready to strike. He spoke of the years he had spent supporting me from the sidelines, a narrative he had been building for years, brick by brick, lie by lie. He painted a picture of himself as a silent partner, the emotional bedrock of my success. He spoke of the silent sacrifices he'd made for his so-called painting career, a career that had never produced a single sale or garnered a single ounce of critical recognition. I remembered the disastrous gallery show I had funded, where the only attendees were his mother and a few of my business contacts who came out of politeness, their praise as hollow as Leo's artistic vision. I remembered comforting him for weeks afterward, assuring him that his genius was simply misunderstood, all the while knowing the truth: he had no genius, only a vast and bottomless well of envy. He now argued that his emotional contribution, his mere presence in my life, entitled him to 50% of my company and full, unilateral control of the winery. He used phrases like emotional labor and holding space, terms he'd picked up from self-help podcasts, twisting their meaning to suit his avarice. It was a fantasy he had constructed to justify his own mediocrity, a way to claim a victory he had never earned. From his tablet, the shrill, grating voice of his mother, Brenda, chimed in via a crackling video call. She was propped up against a stack of law books on his screen, a digital gargoyle presiding over the proceedings. Her background was a deliberately curated wall of what looked like first edition novels, though I knew for a fact she hadn't read a book in years. She was his ever-present cheerleader and co-conspirator. She echoed his sentiments with practiced piety, painting a picture of her son as a long-suffering martyr who had withered away in my formidable shadow. She spoke of his artistic spirit being crushed by the demands of my business, a business that had afforded them a life of unimaginable luxury, a life Brenda herself had enthusiastically partaken in, often sending me links to designer handbags she thought I should buy for her, as a little thank you for all her support. She claimed this hostile takeover was the only way to save our marriage, a marriage I now realized had been a carefully constructed sham, a long con with the winery as the ultimate prize. It was then that Leo slid the shoddily prepared documents across the vast expanse of the desk. A contract for the complete and total transfer of my assets. Sign it, he commanded, his voice losing its gentle facade and taking on a hard, ugly edge I had never heard before, but instantly recognized as his true self. Or I will make sure the story of the neglectful, work-obsessed wife who drove her sensitive husband to despair is told in every courtroom and every gossip blog in this state. He was threatening to turn my own success into a weapon against me, to paint me as the villain in a story I hadn't even known was being written. To prove his point, to show me the teeth behind his threat. He tapped the screen of his tablet. It showed a draft of a social media post. It was a picture he must have taken that morning, of himself looking deliberately gaunt and melancholic, standing among the vines my family had planted generations ago. The caption was a masterclass in passive aggression. Standing behind a successful woman sometimes means being left in the dark, proud of everything she's built, even if it cost me my own light. The manipulation was so blatant, so disgustingly transparent. The threat was clear. He wasn't just trying to take my money, he was prepared to dismantle my reputation, to destroy the very name my grandfather had built with honor and integrity. He was trying to poison the roots of my life's work, to salt the earth of my legacy. A profound, bone-deep chill of betrayal washed over me, so intense it felt like drowning in ice water for a moment. The room tilted, the scent of oak and earth turning sour in my nostrils. And in that moment of shock, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear, a lifeline in the churning chaos of the present. It was from 6 months ago. I was sitting in a different office, one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the sleek, modern office of Miss Albright. I had come to her with a vague but persistent sense of unease, a knot of anxiety in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Leo's spending had become reckless, spiraling out of control. I'd found statements for a credit card I didn't know he had, filled with charges for things that made no sense: expensive lunches at hotels, subscriptions to financial newsletters, a ridiculously overpriced life coaching service. He had become distant, spending hours on the phone with his mother in hushed, conspiratorial tones. Whenever I entered the room, he would abruptly end the call. I told Miss Albright I felt like I was going crazy, that I was being paranoid, that maybe I was the one who was truly neglectful. She had listened patiently, her fingers steepled under her chin, her gaze sharp and unwavering. When I finished, She looked at me over the rim of her glasses and said, her voice calm and firm, "Clara, in my line of work, paranoia is just good preparation. Men like Leo, men who feel emasculated by their wife's success, they don't just leave. They try to burn the whole world down on their way out. Let's hope for the best. But let us, you and I, prepare for the absolute worst. Let's create a plan B." And so we had. We had spent weeks drafting a document, a legal fortress, a silent weapon waiting to be deployed. That memory was the anchor that pulled me from the depths of my shock. The pain was still there, a white-hot agony in my chest, but it was now joined by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. I forced the pain down, burying it deep beneath a mask of practiced hysteria I didn't know I was capable of wearing. I summoned tears from that well of genuine pain, but I channeled them into a performance. My shoulders began to shake with manufactured sobs. I played the part of the broken woman he and his mother so clearly expected me to be, a woman cornered, defeated, and ready to surrender. I pleaded with him, my voice choked with emotion, telling him he was destroying everything we had built. From the corner of my eye, I saw him exchange a triumphant, smug glance with his mother on the screen. Their victory seemed assured. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my patience for passivity. They had no idea they were watching a rehearsal for their own downfall. I told him I needed to call my accountant, just to understand the tax implications of this agreement. It was the perfect excuse, a believable delay tactic for a businesswoman like myself. He nodded magnanimously, a king granting a final request to a condemned prisoner. I stepped out of the room, my hand trembling slightly as I walked down the familiar hallway, my feet silent on the worn floorboards my grandmother had once polished by hand. I dialed the number for my lawyer, when she answered with her customary, brisk, Albright. I spoke only 2 words, my voice a low, steady whisper that held no trace of the panic I was performing. Plan B. Then I hung up. There was nothing more to say. The gears were already in motion. Returning to the office, I wiped my fake tears and looked at Leo with an expression of utter, soul-crushing resignation. "All right, Leo, you win." I sighed, letting my voice crack just enough to be convincing. "I'll sign the papers. Let's do it tonight, right here, and just get this over with." He beamed, the picture of a man who believed he had just successfully orchestrated the heist of a lifetime. He had no idea he was the one walking into a meticulously prepared trap. He saw my tears not as a sign of my pain, but as a reflection of his power, as he turned to boast to his mother on the tablet. I caught a glimpse of my own face reflected in the dark screen. There were no tears in the eyes of the woman staring back at me. Her expression was cold, calm, and intensely focused. She looked like a predator that had just scented blood, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She looked like her grandfather. That evening, the air in our living room was thick and heavy with Leo's smug sense of accomplishment. He had opened a bottle of my finest 2015 Reserve, the crown jewel of my winery, to toast to his own brilliance. With Brenda's face still glowing from the tablet propped up on the mantel like a malevolent household god, he placed the contract in front of me and handed me a heavy, expensive pen. "Sign it, Clara," he urged, his voice smooth as the wine he was drinking. "Sign for our future." I picked up the pen. Allowing my hand to tremble for effect, I slowly, deliberately, signed my name on the dotted line. I didn't read the words. I didn't have to. I had memorized the real ones. I pushed the documents back towards him, in a final dramatic gesture. I unhooked the heavy, ornate key to the main house from my keychain and placed it gently on top of the stack of papers. "The house is yours," I said, my voice hoarse. "Everything in it is yours." With that, I stood up, my movement slow as if weighed down by grief. I turned my back on him and walked out of the house my ancestors had built, carrying nothing but my purse and my car keys. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, I could hear their triumphant laughter. It was a hollow, ugly sound that I knew would not last the night. Just before the door closed, I heard Brenda's voice, sharp and tinny. "See? My boy, I told you all she needed was a little pressure, and she crumbled like a cheap cookie." I walked into the cool night air, not as a victim, but as a woman who had just executed the opening move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. I didn't drive away immediately. I parked at the end of the long driveway, just out of sight, and watched the lights of my house. My house, and I waited. An hour later, a discreet black car pulled up to the back entrance. A young paralegal from Miss Albright's office got out, carrying an identical briefcase to the one I had left inside. He entered through the service door, for which I had given him a key. 10 minutes later, he emerged, got back in his car, and drove away. He had retrieved the signed, fraudulent postnuptial agreement and left in its place a perfectly notarized copy for Leo to discover in his own time. The trap was now fully set and baited. The next morning, Leo awoke in what he believed was his new kingdom. He tried to book a first-class, non-refundable vacation to the Maldives. The corporate credit card was declined, annoyed. He tried another, declined. Panic must have started to curdle his celebratory mood when he discovered that every single account connected to the winery had been frozen. His access to my world had been severed. The contract I had signed was, of course, the one from Plan B. It was a brilliantly crafted postnuptial agreement. In it, I generously agreed to waive any claim to his personal assets, his worthless paintings and collection of designer clothes I'd paid for, in exchange for him formally and irrevocably relinquishing all claims to any and all of my assets, including the inherited property and the business. His signature, witnessed by his own mother, was an ironclad confession that he accepted these terms. He had, in his haste and arrogance, signed his own financial death warrant. But Miss Albright, ever thorough, wasn't finished. She sent Leo's new lawyer a second package. It contained a meticulously detailed file documenting every dollar that Leo and Brenda had siphoned from the business. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud, Leo's legal threats evaporated. A few months later, I stood on the veranda of my home, gazing out at the vineyard. The vines were lush with the promise of a bountiful harvest, indifferent to the petty human drama that had unfolded. The only mail I'd received with Leo's name on it was a final notice from a debt collection agency. I calmly used the letter as a coaster for my glass of wine, a new vintage I had created. I decided to call it Solitude. On the table was a small article from the local newspaper. It featured a photo of Leo at a local art fair, attempting to sell his garish paintings for $20 apiece. The caption didn't even mention his name. Looking at the picture, I felt no anger, only a quiet sense of finality. The lesson was not about revenge, it was about truth. You can't steal the soul of a place. It lives in your blood, in the soil, and in the hard, honest work you pour into it every day. Leo had tried to steal a house, but he ended up learning the hard way that he had never truly had a home. He had only ever been a guest, and his visiting hours were over. In the end, some truths are undeniable. True value can't be seized by force or signed away on paper. It lives in the quiet dignity of our work, the history we honor, and the integrity we refuse to surrender. The loudest storms are often the most fleeting, because real strength isn't the noise you make, but the foundation you stand upon, one that can never truly be taken. Thank you for being with us for this story. What part resonated with you the most? We would love to read your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you appreciate stories of quiet resilience and poetic justice, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications to become part of our community. We'll see you in the next one.